Morning, morning. Welcome, everybody. This morning we are talking business, I believe. So all about business. So yeah, for a change, I'm just going to kick it straight across to Trevor because this is his problem, his baby, and his his passion. So, Trevor, what is it about business?
Oh, I haven't got a clue, but I'm sure that Lee gave us a better title than that. So perhaps Lee must just, oh, well, there, Ed, he will know the title because he's done his homework. But I seem to remember that there was a specific title that Lee wanted to address. So Ed or Lee.
What is your philosophy? What is your philosophy about doing business?
You see how I said that without even moving my lips?
What is your philosophy about doing business? Well, I think you've got to allow me an opportunity just to grab you. Let me see if I can get something here. Bear with me in a moment. How do we do chat? Okay, this is my simple philosophy. It's borrowed. I wonder if anyone knows where this came from. Ed will.
Mr. McCorber.
Oh, okay. Tabusa, seeing as that you study all the great minds of all time, do you know who Mr. McCorber is? You don't. Thank goodness for that. Now we've got something that we can trump Tabusa on because he's been making us look like small fry in the last couple of weeks. Okay, so Mr. McCorber was a character in David Copperfield. Charles Dickens was the author. David Copperfield, you've got to go and read it. This is perhaps the best business statement that I ever picked up, and that was coming out of David Copperfield, and what he was turning around here was saying, listen, if you're going to get into business, make certain that you are cash flow positive. Now, I think there are two styles of getting into business. And so if you want to call business philosophy from myself, I've had the privilege of doing business in two ways. One, walking into an infrastructure that had already been started up, had a consumer base. So that consumer base was a small group of franchisees who were actually turning over some revenue, but none of them were profitable. And there were probably, I can't remember the number at the time, 8 or 9 franchisees in that particular model. And I spent, in fact, I gave something of an input on that, that I spent 90 days. I left my wife and kids down in Durban, came up here, and for 90 days solid, I basically slept in the office while I was up here in Joburg, had a look at this thing and completely turned it around, had a look for where I thought they weren't pumping in the operation, and then tweaked it in terms of branding, positioning, repositioned the brand, and went out to the marketplace with the repositioning. It was a company called Academy of Learning, which in 18 months then became the largest private sector education franchise of the time. This was in the late 1980s. From really struggling to get numbers, within 18 months, we had put 80,000 students through the project. It's a big story. I wrote about it in Confessions of a Serial Entrepreneur. I'll give you a link. You can go and have a look at some of that story. And that I found quite simple to do. That it's very easy for an outsider to come into a business, whether it's in, well, this is my view anyway, whether it's struggling to do something, if it has got a proven history of attracting revenue in or loyal consumers. Then I think there is the most difficult way to do business, and that is as a startup entrepreneur. And we've talked of this in various wisdoms chats, of the concepts of minimum viable propositions, concepts where you go out there and you're an innovative entrepreneur and you put out an idea and you look to attract consumers. You're at the bleeding edge, which others call the cutting edge, but you bleed blood trying to create a market and trying to create revenue. I think that is the most difficult way to actually do something. Take a new idea and get people to actually buy into that idea. And it takes a long time to establish that. And if you're going to be doing that, my philosophy and my advice to first-time entrepreneurs who are getting into business is, for goodness sake, please, protect your house and home. Don't go out taking this blooming advice that says get the biggest blooming ego size of car that you can get. That was a concept that came from a mate of mine. I'll get his Jim Miller. All right, and Jim, who turned around and identified, he and his wife at the time, Iona Miller, were teaching people not to go overboard with these ego size of cars that you actually purchase to show people how successful you are. And it's all show, but you're deep in debt. Really, the last thing you want to do as an entrepreneur is to put yourself and your family and your home and everything that you've got at major risk. So I've always, as when we do entrepreneurial things, I've always had this philosophy of cash flow positive from day one. And what that does is make certain that you're not putting yourself at huge risk of being one of the many entrepreneurs, and there's a large percentage of entrepreneurs that do not stay in business. I think the numbers are something like 70% are not in business after 5 years, and maybe 50% are not in business after the first 2 years. And you can go and get those sort of stats. They're all over the place. I think the US does some real good identifying of what those particular stats are. So make certain that you're always cash flow positive from day one if you're a startup entrepreneur. I suppose that's very much a philosophy that I convey, and I have partners in a wisdom's business who will recognize I talk about that all the time. Okay, so what are we doing? It's revenue first, then costs. Really, I recognize that a large number of people think that you should be throwing everything at the costs because you will get a return later. Well, all those usually failed first-time entrepreneurs actually tend to tell me differently. So as a first-time startup entrepreneur, I do the Mr. McCorber thing. So that's why I love his quote. Let me stop there.
All right, thanks, Trevor. So let's go across to the man who owns the bank. I know he's got some fairly strong ideas on this one as well.
Hi there. Yes, just on a side note, my phone was stolen last week, and I just managed to fix or to get a semi phone going. And last night the phone packed up again. So after today's, so in between, so Mr. Bank doesn't have a phone. So anyway, so on the business philosophy, I think I didn't really start off with the philosophy of business because my mind was very much programmed to follow the thinking of the day, you know, study, get a good education, find a good company to work for, work hard, and life will be happy ever after. And it was almost circumstances that threw me. It looks like my internet connection is also very unstable. But So eventually I did get into business. And if I now look back at my experience in business, I strongly recommend that whoever consider whatever kind of business, make sure the income is of a residual nature kind of income, because there's a lot of businesses out there that like if you sell a house, it's fine, you can make a good income from the commission, but then you go and have to find the next house to sell, and you every time start from zero. So for me, it was to say, if I put in the effort and the time, business is going to be hard, whichever way you look at it. But if I'm going to put in the time and the effort, year after year, I want to be able to look back and say, I've built a foundation, and every year it's easier and easier because of the foundation. So that's one of my philosophies. I won't really look at any business if there's not some sort of a residual income component to it. Then I got into guest house business, also not totally planned, but because of my success in New Life, we started to see people having to come to South Africa and needing a place to stay. And slowly over the years, we've then invested surplus and built up a very good asset base. And it was basically the business who carried a lot of my expenses for many years, even what I had to invest in the bank to get the bank going, initially came from the guest house business. But what I've learned, and I was very happy with that business, and I'm still happy with that business, except I've learned that it doesn't matter how strong your asset base is, if it doesn't generate cash flow, it can easily get to that minus side, that quote that Trevor gave us earlier, because big assets still require maintenance and upkeep. So, you know, if that starts to happen, unless you have a plan to turn it around, rather get out of that assets. Then another business that I like is the service industry, but I say that with almost a qualification. I cannot do just, you know, service industry would be education, service industry would be your insurance industry, service industry would be doctors and people who sell their skills. But they have a huge problem that although their services are needed at some time in a person's life, how do they go about marketing themselves? Because it's, you know, they also rely on large numbers. So I am today pretty much, I think the bank would probably fall in that kind of category as a service industry. But you need large numbers to make it work. So unless you have a good cause that keep people in, because another reality is the retention rate of customers. So what is your key to keep people in? And we've seen that in industries like network marketing and insurance, the retention rate is very low. People come and go, there's no loyalty. So find an on, and then you have a better chance of success. So I think if I just look at my own path, even the bank need numbers. And it took us 10 years from 2008 to 2018 to get to the point where we had break even, and I didn't have to support it in one way or another every month anymore. So, but if I didn't have the momentum coming from my other income streams, I could not have had that ability to leverage. So for me, it's constantly leveraging whatever surplus you have into the new venture that can, you know, increase the momentum and multiply the momentum. And then ultimately, why do you do business? Is it just to have more money in the bank, or is it the impact that you make? So today I would say I'll probably in the category of social entrepreneur, to say where are their needs in life and how can I then meet those needs in a sustainable, commercially sustainable way, because there's absolutely no sustainability in donor funding and all sorts of other handouts. You have to find the need and find a commercial way to make it sustainable. So yeah, it's up to people now how to take it further from this.
Right, thanks, Jasper. Right, Ed, can you add up all these numbers?
Yeah, I've just discovered I got something else in common with Trevor, because I too spent a lot of time sleeping in the office to try and sort a problem out that we'd fallen into. But anyhow, that's another story. When Lee first posed the question, what is your philosophy of business? I immediately thought about first do no harm. And that's comes from the Latin, really, from a long way away, from an ancient time. And then I suddenly thought, wait a minute, why am I accepting the question in the way it's framed? And you see, philosophy is the use of reason and argument to seek the truth about existence. And philosophy is about people like Aristotle, Plato, Confucius, Descartes, and perhaps in more modern times, Karl Marx, Nietzsche, Wittgenstein, Bertrand Russell, Debussy. But business is about more prosaic things, baser things. It's about merchants and money and consumers. And do you remember what happened to merchants, consumers, and moneylenders when Jesus went to the temple? He threw them out and he accused them of turning the temple into a den of thieves. And if you look at the accounts in Luke and Mark, they both talk about the fact that Jesus accused the officials of the temple of actually stealing from people. And they talked about the victims of being widows because they were selling them pigeons to sacrifice because they couldn't afford anything better, but they couldn't afford the pigeons, but they were still selling them the pigeons. So I think to talk about a philosophy of business is wrong. It's simply elevating it to a status it doesn't deserve. I think we have a way of doing business. And if you want to call it something fancy, call it a modus operandi. And my way of doing business is very much in line with Trevor's story about the entrepreneur who dug that channel for the water. And there, you know, he was getting benefit, his neighbors were getting benefit, and everyone was benefiting. It was a mutual benefit sort of operation. But I think a lot of businesses have gone past that and they've gone into exploitation. And Jasper talked about customer retention. You know, some of the ways to try and get customers aren't perhaps that ethical. You know, you can go into a supermarket, they've got a special offer on. The special offer is worse than actually buying the normal thing. You know, people are also encouraged, like the widows in ancient times, to buy things they don't really need. And we're seeing that with all the rubbish that people buy, the tat and the whatever. And people are encouraged to buy more and more, like Trevor and talking about people wanting those flashy cars that they can't afford, people building life on credit. So I think to talk about philosophy of business is simply quite wrong. We should talk about the methods of doing businesses, the way of doing businesses, our style of doing businesses, but let's not elevate it to Descartes and to Plato and those people. So that's my thoughts. It might annoy a few people, but you know, I like throwing the odd hand grenade into events.
Boom. Okay, so we better get across to the philosopher and find out whether he can tell us where he sees this one going to be, sir.
Well, because I am the business, you know, I prize consistency more than anything, you know. I think that, you know, consistency and care are the things that actually produce the best results, you know. And as a business, I strive to deliver every day, you know, to show up every day, even when I don't feel like it, you know. I think that my thought process is always to dominate, to maintain the pressure, you know, to maintain the stamina and to just be the best, you know. Because consistency is like linear, I love that, you know, because it actually helps my business to grow incrementally, you know. This is important because I don't like to overwhelm myself, you know. I prefer to work smart than hard, you know. I don't like to work hard just for the sake of working hard, you know. I prefer to be productive, you know, and to have space and time to actually think things through, you know. I think that my space and my thoughts are important, you know, so I try to protect that as best as I can, you know. Because I value consistency more than anything, creating systems and frameworks is paramount to me, you know. Systems is actually how I organize things, you know. It is how I standardize things. It is how I make sense of things, you know, because if I have a default factory settings, I can make minor or major adjustments to the system, you know. Systems are actually things that make me consistent, you know, because without systems, I can't really do anything. I need something to improve on, you know, but when I have a system, I know that maybe 1, 2 is not going well, or I can improve on that, you know. So systems and frameworks are very important to me, you know. And I think that I always try to invert, you know, that is to work from backwards, going to the beginning, you know, because I think I found that by actually inverting, you know, it actually helps me pick out things that I don't want, you know. Um, for example, what I don't want, you know, as a business, you know, I don't want to be around negative people. I don't want to be around unmotivated people, and I don't want to be around passive people, you know. And by knowing what I don't want, you know, I think that it helps me get better results, you know, because I know what to avoid, you know. So I think that when it comes to inverting and working from backwards, it actually assists, you know, it actually, wow, it helps me. I like that, you know, it is how I actually move forward, you know. And I always like to elevate my perspective, you know, to actually think things through in terms of maybe months or even years, you know. Um, Having an elevated perspective helps me to not fall prey to, you know, what is happening now, so that I don't be expedient, you know, so that I don't fall into the trap of instant gratification, you know. Um, I strongly believe that the present is an illusion, you know, and that time, you know, time when used correctly, you know, it actually is the true revealer of things, you know. So I believe in time more. I believe in the passage of time, because the present just fades away, you know. But not that I don't prize the present moment, I do. With the present moment, I work hard, I do what I can, but I don't place a lot of emphasis on it, you know. I always like to keep an elevated perspective, and it helps me to actually see things through, you know. So when it comes to my business philosophy, I would say that consistency, creating systems and frameworks, to invert and have an elevated perspective. Those are my business philosophies. So thank you, Ivan.
Thank you, Teresa. All right, lovely stuff. Okay, Lee, over to you.
How do you follow that?
That's why I handed it to you, didn't bother to try.
Oh dear, I think about, and Edward's right in the sense of elevating business in the sense of philosophy, because I know that when I started my business, philosophy was the furthest thing from my mind. If I'd started with Tabiso's philosophy, maybe I would be light years ahead. But I had my practice of business was to lurch from one thing to the next until I found what worked. and I've in hindsight, I created a philosophy around it to justify my practice. But I do think there are some foundational principles that may be different for each person in terms of what is it that drives the underlying purpose and desire and practice of their business, that their actions actually are related to some deeper sense of why they are doing something. And yes, I guess my philosophy has been shaped by my experience of business rather than the other way around. And these are the things that I believe are important to me in terms of my understanding of certainly how my business has worked. And the one is that if you are not meeting your customer's need, and I know that sounds very salesy, but if you're not meeting their need, you don't have a business. So understanding your customer, getting to know, and this for me, it's as I say, I'm sounding very salesy, but it's not about that. For me, I've realized that your business doesn't survive unless you are in line or aligned with your customer, whoever that customer is. The customer chooses. They have choice. And if you're not up to what they need, to the quality that they require, they are not mean to you. Customers, in my experience, are not emotional about their choices. They just make their choice, and you are either chosen or you are not chosen. It's as simple as that. So don't put your emotion into it. You have to align yourself with where the customer wants, what they want. And I think that's becoming more and more prevalent. The greater the competition, the more globalized we are, the greater the access people have to different ways of doing things. So all of that. So first of all, so philosophy number one, pay attention to what your customer is saying, doing, and go there. The second thing is, don't think you can do it on your own. Business is tough. We've mentioned that already. So first of all, it's tough. Doing it on your own, you're trying to be a superhero, and actually it's not a superhero sport. So you need others. But more than that, your brain isn't sufficient. You can't think of everything. You need to innovate. You need different people. And thirdly, in terms of partnerships, you need muscle. You need to have a sense of whether it's a brand, whether it's IP, whether it's size. You need other people that give you a bigger view and a bigger perspective than just yourself, from your own perspective, but also in the eyes of your customer. So those are three simple things. Shall I keep it at 3? 3 seems to be like a magic number. So yeah, so Ivan, over to you.
Thanks, Lee. Yeah, I must admit, I'm completely confused now. So don't know which way to go. And if I had a philosophy, it's been trashed. So no, I don't know. I think for me, it's It is. It's relatively simple. I think it's about under promising and over delivering, and whatever you do. I think too many people do it the other way around, and I think that's why so many businesses fail. They go out there and just try and sell things that they can't really deliver, or they don't know how to deliver, and ultimately the market realizes that and it dries up and fails. So I think that for me is the one challenge. I think the other is, if you can't do business on a handshake, don't do business. So it comes down to, believe in yourself and trust. So, those, I think that's the way I've done business my entire career. Never had a written contract with a customer. The one customer that I did was pushed into doing some form of agreement with, bailed on me after I'd bought stock and never bought it from me. And that's in 30 years. One customer did that to me, and he was the one who wanted formal purchase orders and formal this and formal that. The others have simply, we've just operated. So yeah, I think, it's that simple. Yes, Trevor.
It's that simple. But listen, I'm loving the tussle between our philosopher who said the present is an illusion, and Ivan, who turned around and said the present is a gift. So who are we going to follow? And what that reminded me of is one of the dangers of listening to people sharing their philosophies on business is that you actually don't know what underpins those people. And that's why I put this little comment in the chat facility: beware. Every business is unique, because every business person is unique. They have their own vested interest reasons why they want to do things, and they have their own available resources, which allows them to do things that are different to you. So when an individual talks of their particular philosophy, you may be listening to Jeff Bezos, who's sharing the simplicity of being able to shoot for the stars, actually, because he's got multi-billions behind him, and you actually don't know that. And he's turning around to you and saying, you know what, go out there, get that car that you want, get that flashy vehicle, just go for broke, because he has the resource to actually be able to do these things. Or you may be listening to someone who's absolutely unique in his mindset, like an Elon Musk, who turns around and puts his last, what was it, 100 million or 300 million on the line to actually back up the ability to do those electric vehicles of his, the Tesla vehicles. So you have to go and have a look at that story. But you need to, it's very simple just to listen to people and say, okay, that's a great thing. I think I'm going to go and do that. I'm going to buy this. I'm going to get deep into debt. Man, if I don't go and take a 100,000 Rand loan, I'm going to make a big mistake.
True. I'd like to pick up on that, because I think you reminded me of a perfect example of that that we saw play out in front of us in 2010. 2010, South Africa hosted.
Trying to wind up my memory, but remind me. Yeah.
South Africa hosted the World Cup soccer. As some people may remember, and some of us are a bit old to remember that. But anyway, so what happened was there was this huge thing about we're going to have millions of tourists coming in, and everybody wanted to start a B&B, and there was all these promises of opportunities that were going to be created in the townships for people to host visitors and so on, and big organizations like Sun International were hosting these seminars and coaching environments for these small businesses to tell them how to take advantage of 2010. And it comes to exactly what Trevor was just saying about, do you know who's talking to you and what are you actually listening to? And so they were telling these township entrepreneurs about what they needed to do to make their B&B operations ready for 2010 World Cup influx. And I mean, we were working in Soweto at the time, and with many of these entrepreneurs, and they had little B&Bs which were actually very pleasant and nice. And I mean, there were some amazing operations in those townships at the time. They went and listened to Sun International, and they went out and they bought big screen TVs, which they put up in all the bedrooms in their B&Bs. They went out and bought subscriptions to TV channels and things like that, so the visitors could watch the soccer from their bedrooms in the B&Bs, and they invested substantial money in doing all of this. And when it came to the crunch, none of that business was directed their way. And they'd invested all this money and all this time and this effort, dressing up their B&Bs and putting up infrastructure and all sorts of things. And that was a Sun City philosophy. I mean, a Sun International philosophy. Big hotel chain. They can afford to do those kinds of things. So I think it's absolutely key who you lend your ears out to when you're looking about developing or starting a business, and really understanding where that philosophy is coming from.
So can I suggest that we pick this conversation up again next week? So we're following this business channel on a Thursday, and this combination of every business is unique, and yet we all have experience here of starting up a business. So what advice would you give to a startup? Knowing that and holding in balance that they have their own unique way of doing things. So let's, what advice would you give to a startup? So Trevor's simple advice is get a job. I must admit that has come to mind more than once. But like Edward, we choose the path less traveled, right? and it has made all the difference, and that I can attest to as well. So let's talk about that next week, Thursday. What advice would you give to a startup? Okay.
Great, thanks, Lee. Yeah, some of us are just unemployable, so that's not an option. But anyway, let's look for your advice next week. Okay, great. And tomorrow, Lee, have we got a topic for tomorrow?
Yes, tomorrow's topic was attitude and mindset. So is there we're talking about mindset and so what is mindset? I think let's keep it as simple as that. What is mindset?
Okay,
or are mindset and attitude the same thing, or are they very different?
Well, we'll let you talk about that, Trevor.
You just got to get your attitude right. That's all.
Just don't set your mind on it. Okay, have a good one.
Bye.